This is the Volkswagen factory in the 1970s. By the 1970s, the Volkswagen Beetle had already become the best-selling car in the world, surpassing even the Ford Model T. At the time, this was the largest car manufacturing plant in the world, covering over 6.5 million square meters. That's more than 1,200 football fields. Every single day, this factory produced over 4,000 Beetles. And the people working in the factory? Over 50,000 workers, from welders and painters to engineers and quality inspectors, worked here. An employee in the factory earned around 1,200 Deutsche Marks per month, roughly $400 at that time. A solid wage for an industrial job at that time. But the work was tough. Shifts lasted 8 hours, and each worker specialized in just one small task, repeating it hundreds of times per shift. Every car started here in the press shop, where raw materials were transformed into the car's doors and other parts. This part of the factory was, as you can hear, incredibly loud. Huge machines slammed down, shaping the steel into recognizable car parts. The floor shook with every press, and the air was filled with the sound of clanking metal. In fact, Volkswagen literally means people's car. And did you even know that it was designed by Ferdinand Porsche, the same engineer who later created the Porsche sports cars? Workers specialized in very specific tasks. Some would weld all day, while others would fit the same door handle on hundreds of cars. Unlike today's heavily automated plants, this factory in the 1970s still relied mostly on human hands. Sure, some machines existed, but the bulk of the work was done by skilled workers. Volkswagen's factory in Wolfsburg was designed for maximum efficiency. That's why so many people worked there to keep the production going. The press shop had multiple stamping lines running at the same time, each one working on a different part of the car. While one machine pressed out the roof, another shaped the signature round fenders. Every few seconds, a brand new part was created. Employees carefully checked each part to make sure it was shaped correctly. If even one piece was slightly off, it could cause major problems later in the production line. These workers had to be fast and precise to keep up with the factory's high production rate. By the time a shift ended, thousands of car parts had been stamped and stacked, waiting to become part of a finished Beetle. But pressing the steel was just the beginning. Inside Volkswagen's so-called welding shop, workers lined up the doors, fenders, and roof panels where all was welded together. Unlike today's robotic production lines, this meant a team of workers would place metal panels into position, ensuring everything lined up perfectly before welding began. But do you know that music legends like the Beatles, actor Paul Newman, and even Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, drove one at some point? The process had to be precise. Even a tiny misalignment could cause problems later. Workers constantly checked their measurements, using simple tools to make sure each Beetle body was coming together exactly as planned. Now the rounded roof, which gave the Beetle its legendary shape, was carefully attached to the sides. But it still wasn't complete. Without doors, windows, and an engine, the Beetle was just an empty shell. Did you have a Volkswagen Beetle? If so, let us know how long you had it for. Now it was time to bring it to life with color. This happened all in a very special way. Inside the paint shop, each car received its signature glossy finish and even a protective coating. Painting a car wasn't as simple as spraying on a color. The process involved several layers to ensure the paint lasted for years. First, the Beetle body was dipped into an anti-rust solution, which helped prevent corrosion. This was crucial, especially in regions with rain or snow where metal could rust quickly. Once dried, the body moved down the line where workers applied a primer coat. This helped the final color stick better and made the surface smooth. In the 1970s, Volkswagen offered the Beetle in a variety of colors. While black and white were popular, the Beetle was also available in bright orange, green, blue, and yellow, a reflection of the colorful and free-spirited era. Before the Beetle left the paint shop, it was carefully inspected. Workers looked for imperfections, dust specks, or uneven spots. If anything was wrong, the car would be sent back for touch-ups. Did you know that the Beetle's production slowed during World War II as factories focused on military vehicles? But after the war, even British officers helped restart Volkswagen's factory, and by the 1950s, the Beetle was being sold across Europe. However, now it was time to install the most important part, the engine. This step was known as the marriage, because it joined the body and chassis together. Unlike most cars that had a radiator and water cooling, the Beetle's engine used air to keep it from overheating. This design made it simple, lightweight, and very reliable, perfect for long road trips or rough roads. Inside the factory, workers carefully assembled the engine piece by piece in a separate area. The most common engine in the 1970s was a 1.6-liter four-cylinder engine, producing around 50 horsepower. Not a lot by today's standards, but enough for a small, lightweight car. But before the body and engine could be connected, workers first had to prepare the chassis. This included installing the suspension, which helped the car absorb bumps on the road, the transmission, which allowed the driver to shift gears, and also they needed to install the wheels. Now finally, it was time for the big moment, the so-called marriage of the Beetle's body and chassis. This was done using a large machine that carefully lifted the car body. It carefully lowered the painted car body onto the chassis and engine. Workers had to make sure that everything lined up correctly, especially where the engine connected to the transmission. The car still holds a record for being the longest running and most produced car on a single platform. Over 21 million units were built between 1938 and 2003, making it one of the most successful cars in history. Workers checked everything one last time. They made sure the engine started properly, the wheels moved smoothly, and all the key parts were correctly installed. With the heart of the Beetle in place, it was now time to focus on the details that made it for most people nostalgic to look back to. This stage focused on the interior, windows, lights, and other finishing touches. Workers carefully assembled the Beetle's interior. First, they installed the wiring, connecting all the electrical parts like the dashboard, headlights, and horn. Then came the seats, simple yet durable, designed for comfort and easy maintenance. Unlike most modern cars, the Beetle's dashboard was basic but practical, featuring a speedometer, fuel gauge, and a few switches. Did you even know that unlike most cars today, the Beetle had its engine in the back and trunk in the front? The classic Beetle had just the essentials, but that was part of its charm, I guess. Workers moved on to the windows and doors. The windshield and side windows were carefully placed and sealed to prevent leaks. Since the Beetle had rounded windows, they needed to be fitted with precision to ensure a tight, secure seal. The doors were then attached and tested to ensure they opened and closed smoothly. Finally, rubber seals were added around the doors and roof to keep out water and wind noise. The Beetle really started looking like a finished car. Now workers installed the headlights, taillights, and turn signals, checking that all the wiring was connected correctly. Side mirrors and chrome bumpers were added, giving the car its classic vintage look. A Volkswagen badge was placed on the front hood, and the famous Beetle script logo was attached to the back. It was in production for 65 years. Crazy, right? With the final model built in Mexico in 2003. Today, it remains a beloved classic with many still on the road. Let us know if you own one. Now it was time for one of the most important steps: quality control and testing. Before a Beetle could leave the factory, it had to pass a series of inspections to make sure it was ready for the road. One of the most exciting moments was starting the Beetle's engine for the first time. A factory worker would turn the key and the air-cooled engine would roar to life. Once running, the engine was revved and tested to make sure it was producing the right amount of power. Workers also checked for any leaks in the fuel or oil system. Each Beetle then went on to a special rolling road test, where its brakes, acceleration, and steering were tested while the car stayed in place. This ensured that everything functioned correctly before the car ever touched real pavement. To check for leaks, the Beetle was placed in a water spray booth, where powerful jets of water simulated heavy rain. If any water leaked into the car, workers would fix the problem before sending it out for delivery. One of the main reasons why the Volkswagen Beetle became so popular was its affordability. Unlike American cars of the time, which were getting bigger, more powerful, and more expensive, The Beetle remained small, simple, and budget-friendly. In the early 1970s, a brand new Volkswagen Beetle cost around $1,800 to $2,200 in the United States, depending on the model and features. That may sound unbelievably cheap today, but at the time, the average yearly income in the US was about $10,000, and a gallon of gas cost just 35 cents. To put that into perspective, a new Ford Mustang in 1970 cost about $3,500, nearly double the price of a Beetle. A Chevrolet Corvette in 1970 was around $5,000, more than twice the price of a Beetle. A Toyota Corolla, one of its closest competitors, was about $2,000 to $2,500, slightly more expensive than a Beetle. The Beetle was designed to be a car for the people. Since Volkswagen had factories in different countries, the prices varied. In Germany, a new Beetle in the 1970s cost around 5,000 Deutsche Marks. This was an affordable price for most middle-class families. In Mexico, where the Beetle was incredibly popular, prices were lower because Volkswagen had a factory there. Many Mexican families purchased a Beetle as their first car. In Brazil, Volkswagen also produced the Beetle locally, making it a top-selling car. Prices were affordable compared to imported vehicles. Because the Beetle was cheap to produce, easy to repair, and fuel-efficient, it remained one of the most budget-friendly cars ever. In Mexico, the Beetle was so popular that it became the country's most common taxi. Many were painted green and white, and they were used in cities like Mexico City for decades. Even after production ended, Beetle taxis could still be seen on the streets for years. While muscle cars had massive V8 engines, the Beetle had its humble four-cylinder air-cooled engine. But what it lacked in power, it made up for in affordability and reliability. While an American car might cost $4,000 to $6,000 and get 12 miles per gallon, a Beetle cost around $2,000 and got over 25 miles per gallon. There are even stories about people who couldn't afford a brand new Beetle. They bought a used one. Since the Beetle was known for its durability, people could find 5- or 10-year-old models that still ran well for just a few $100s. Crazy, right? Today, finding a classic Beetle for that price is nearly impossible. Restored vintage Beetles now sell for $15,000 to $30,000, and some rare models even go for over $50,000. Looking back, it's fun to see what else people could buy in the 1970s for the price of a new Beetle. A brand new Harley-Davidson motorcycle. Around $2,000, the same as a Beetle. A round-trip plane ticket to Europe. Flights were expensive, and a trip across the Atlantic could cost almost as much as a Beetle. A year of college tuition. In 1970, the cost of college tuition at many universities was around $1,500 to $2,500 per year, similar to the price of a Beetle. Back then, you could walk into a dealership and buy a brand new Beetle for just $2,000. Today, those same cars have become priceless classics, with collectors and enthusiasts willing to pay tens of thousands of dollars to own one. If you could go back in time and buy a brand new Beetle for 1970s prices, would you? Let us know in the comments.